everyone, welcome back. Today, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the fascinating world of behavioral genetics. We're going to be looking at just how much our genes and our environment work together to shape our behaviors and mental health,
Yeah,
using insights from the Behavioral Genetics of Psychopathology, a clinical guide. We've got
right.
some really interesting questions to explore. Do our genes actually dictate our mental health? Is it all about how we were raised?
Right.
Spoiler alert. The answer is way more complicated than a simple yes or no.
That's right.
Yeah.
And we'll be exploring the idea that it's not nature versus nurture, but nature and nurture.
Yeah.
And so we'll uncover how they work together, and I think you'll be surprised
Yeah.
at just how intertwined they truly are.
Exactly. And don't worry, we won't get bogged down in the technical stuff. No complex statistics or gene names here. We're all about understanding the cool concepts in a way that's both insightful and engaging. So first things first, genes. They're powerful, but they don't tell the whole story.
Right. That's where the heritability coefficient, or H2, comes in. Think of it as a percentage that shows how much variation in a trait within a population is due to genetic differences.
Okay.
Take height, for example. Height is highly heritable, meaning genes play a big role in how tall you are.
Hmm.
But your environment, things like nutrition, also matters.
So if someone has like the genes to be really tall, but they don't get enough nutritious food while they're growing up,
Yeah,
they might not actually reach their full potential height.
exactly. And here's the crucial point. Heritability is about differences within a population, not about whether your individual height is predetermined.
Ah, okay. So even if a trait is highly heritable, it doesn't mean our environment is powerless. There's this constant interplay between the two.
Right, and that interplay is what makes behavioral genetics so fascinating. It's this intricate dance between our genes and our environment that shapes who we are.
Okay. So how do scientists actually visualize this? It's not like we can, see genes and environment duking it out
Yeah.
in our brains.
Right. Well, that's where the threshold liability model comes in.
Yeah.
It's a way to picture how genes and environment work together.
Mm.
Imagine a bell curve. Most people fall in the middle,
Yeah.
with fewer at the extremes.
Okay.
Let's say we're talking about depression. The far end of the curve represents those who develop the disorder.
So where you fall on that curve is influenced by both your genes and your environment.
Yes. A great example is sensation seeking, a personality trait known to be highly heritable. Some people are naturally drawn to new experiences, while others prefer routine. Now, how this trait is expressed can vary dramatically depending on your environment.
Okay, so someone high in sensation seeking might thrive in a fast-paced entrepreneurial environment,
Exactly.
whereas someone else with that same genetic predisposition might really struggle with impulsivity and risk-taking behaviors
Right.
if their environment lacks structure and support.
Exactly.
This makes me think about a common concern with this whole area. Doesn't studying behavioral genetics lead to dangerous ideas about superior genes
Right.
or even eugenics?
It's a crucial point, and it's understandable why some might think that. However, behavioral genetics is about understanding, not judging or manipulating. It's about recognizing that human behavior is complex and that both genes and environmental factors are at play.
The book actually addresses this head on, right?
Mhm.
It uses a really interesting comparison to historical figures like George Washington and Abraham Lincoln.
Yes. Back in the 1970s, one of the authors used these historical figures to illustrate how arguments about nature and nurture can be misinterpreted and lead to harmful conclusions.
Right.
It serves as a reminder that scientific findings can be twisted, but that doesn't invalidate the science itself.
So how do researchers actually untangle the roles of genes and environment? Because it can't be easy to separate those two things out.
It's definitely not. One of the most powerful tools they use is twin studies. By comparing identical and fraternal twins,
Right.
especially those raised apart, we get a unique glimpse into how genes and different types of environments shape who we are.
Yeah, it sounds like a fascinating natural experiment.
It is. The logic is pretty straightforward. If identical twins raised in totally different environments still share a trait, it points to a strong genetic influence.
But hold on, aren't there some limitations with twin studies? I've heard critiques about how twins, even those raised apart, might still experience more similar environments than non-twin siblings.
You raise a valid point. And researchers are aware of these limitations.
Okay.
They take a lot of care to account for these factors. For example, they might closely examine the socioeconomic status of the adoptive families, or any similarities in the twins' upbringing.
So while it's not a perfect method, twin studies can still be a really powerful tool when used carefully.
Precisely. And they've led to some intriguing discoveries. For instance, did you know that there are interesting gender differences when it comes to the heritability of depression?
Really? I had no idea.
Research consistently shows a higher heritability of depression in women compared to men.
Wow, that's surprising. So does that mean different genes are involved or just like different levels of influence?
That's where it gets even more interesting. Not only is the heritability higher in women, but the specific genes involved might also differ.
Wow.
Researchers use a technique called genetic correlation studies to investigate this.
And what have they found?
The evidence suggests that the genetic pathways to depression might not be identical for men and women. It raises a lot of questions. Why might this be? Could hormones or social factors play a role? There's so much more to uncover.
This all reminds me of something else we came across in our research, the kindling hypothesis. It almost sounds like learning to be depressed.
It's a fascinating concept. The Kingling hypothesis suggests that initial episodes of depression might be triggered more by life events like a major loss or trauma.
Okay.
But as you experience more episodes, your brain almost learns the pattern, making you more susceptible to future episodes.
So the more you experience depression, the easier it becomes to fall back into that state.
That's the general idea. And it connects back to the threshold liability model we discussed earlier. Early on, environmental factors might have a stronger influence, pushing you towards the depressed end of the curve. But over time, your genetic predisposition could become a bigger factor.
It's almost like the brain develops like a sensitivity to depression based on past experiences.
That's a good way to think about it. If this hypothesis holds true, it raises a crucial question. Could earlier intervention be even more critical in preventing chronic depression?
That's a powerful implication. It highlights how understanding this interplay could lead to like better ways to approach mental health.
Exactly. And this applies not just to depression, but to a whole range of mental health conditions.
We've talked a lot about depression, but what about anxiety disorders? They seem to be quite different from like mood disorders.
You're right. Anxiety disorders are a whole other fascinating area of study. And research suggests they may have a lower heritability compared to conditions like depression.
Oh, so does that mean environment plays an even bigger role in anxiety?
It seems that way. Learning and conditioning are especially influential when it comes to anxiety.
Are we talking about like, learned fears and phobias?
Yes. The book has this striking example about a study where the heritability of animal phobia disappeared when they took out the unreasonable fear part of the definition.
Wait, so if you remove the idea that the fear is irrational, the genetic component vanishes.
It is. And it points to the possibility that our genes might predispose us to fear certain things for good evolutionary reasons.
Right.
Think about it. Fearing dangerous animals would have been crucial for survival for our ancestors.
So our genes give us a blueprint for fear, but our experiences shape which fears become, like, problematic.
Exactly. This highlights how nature and nurture are constantly interacting and influencing each other. It's not a simple equation. It's a complex dance between genes and environment.
It goes back to that initial point. It's nature and nurture, not one versus the other.
You got it. And that's a key takeaway from behavioral genetics. It challenges our assumptions about free will, responsibility, and even the nature of mental illness.
It feels like a field that's constantly expanding our understanding of ourselves.
Absolutely. And as we uncover more about this intricate interplay, we gain a deeper appreciation for the incredible complexity of the human experience.
It's incredible to think that we can, like, trace some of our behaviors and tendencies back to our genes and the environment we grew up in.
Right.
It makes you realize just how interconnected we all are.
It really highlights the shared human experience, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
And behavioral genetics isn't just helping us understand individual differences. It's also eliminating broader patterns in mental health. You mentioned earlier how anxiety and mood disorders seem different.
Right.
Well, there's a fascinating connection between the two that researchers have discovered.
Tell me more.
It's this idea of internalizing and externalizing disorders.
Okay.
Internalizing disorders are those where distress is directed inwards, like with depression or anxiety.
Oh.
Externalizing disorders involve more outward behaviors, like aggression or substance abuse.
So someone struggling with an internalizing disorder might like withdraw and isolate themselves, whereas someone with an externalizing disorder might lash out.
Exactly.
Hmm.
What's fascinating is that these two categories seem to have different genetic and environmental influences.
Okay.
Research suggests that individuals with a family history of internalizing disorders are more likely to develop either anxiety or depression,
Okay.
not necessarily one or the other.
So it's like there's an underlying vulnerability to internalizing disorders in general, and then specific environmental factors might tip the scales towards anxiety or depression.
That's the idea. And it challenges our traditional way of classifying mental illness.
Hmm.
Perhaps instead of focusing on individual disorders in isolation, we need to consider these broader underlying dimensions.
It's like zooming out to see the bigger picture of mental health.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And this has implications for how we diagnose, treat, and even prevent these conditions.
Yeah.
Imagine being able to identify individuals with this predisposition to internalizing disorders early on.
Right.
We might be able to intervene and prevent either anxiety or depression from taking hold.
It's a powerful shift from reactive care to like proactive mental health support.
Absolutely. Behavioral genetics isn't just about understanding the past, it's about shaping a healthier future for individuals and for society as a whole.
Now, if internalizing and externalizing disorders have these distinct influences, does that suggest there's also a genetic component to substance abuse?
You're thinking along the right lines. Substance use disorders have been a major area of focus in behavioral genetics, and the evidence is clear. Genes play a substantial role in our vulnerability to addiction.
So some individuals might be genetically more prone to developing a dependence on alcohol or drugs?
Yes, although it's crucial to remember that a genetic predisposition isn't a guarantee.
Right. Environment always plays a role.
Exactly. Just
Yeah.
because someone has a genetic vulnerability doesn't mean they're destined to become addicted. It just means they might be more sensitive to the effects of those substances and might need to be more cautious in certain environments.
It all comes back to that powerful analogy. Genes load the gun, but environment pulls the trigger.
Precisely. We have the ability to make choices and shape our own paths, even in the face of genetic predispositions.
Okay, so we've discussed mood disorders, anxiety disorders, and substance abuse.
Right.
What other areas are being illuminated by behavioral genetics?
Oh, there are so many. One particularly fascinating area is personality disorders.
Okay.
They're often considered the most challenging mental health conditions to treat,
Right.
and behavioral genetics is helping us understand why.
I've always found personality disorders to be a bit of a puzzle.
Hmm.
Are we talking about deeply ingrained personality traits, or is there like a biological component at play?
The answer, as you might expect, is complex.
Yeah.
Research suggests that personality disorders are rooted in both our genes and our early childhood experiences.
So our genes might provide like a foundation, and then our upbringing shapes how those traits manifest.
Exactly. For example, imagine a child with a genetic predisposition for impulsivity.
Okay.
If they are raised in a chaotic or abusive environment, they might be more likely to develop a severe personality disorder.
Mm.
On the other hand, if they're raised in a supportive and structured environment,
Yeah.
those tendencies might be mitigated.
It seems that our environment can either amplify or buffer those genetic tendencies.
Precisely. And this has significant implications for treatment.
Mm.
It suggests that we need to address not only the symptoms of personality disorders, but also the underlying environmental factors that might be contributing to their severity.
It really makes you think about how much of what we perceive as personality might be influenced by factors beyond our control.
It's a thought-provoking question, isn't it?
Mm.
Behavioral genetics is challenging our assumptions about the nature of personality and the interplay between nature and nurture.
Now, what about conditions like schizophrenia, which is often considered a primarily biological disorder? Does behavioral genetics have anything to contribute to our understanding of it?
You're right, schizophrenia does have a strong biological component.
Okay.
Twin studies consistently demonstrate that it is one of the most heritable mental health conditions, with heritability estimates often exceeding 80%.
Wow, that's significant.
Yeah.
So genes are undeniably a major factor in schizophrenia.
They are. But even with such high heritability, environment still plays a role.
So could someone with a high genetic risk for schizophrenia potentially avoid developing the disorder if they have a very supportive and stable upbringing?
That's a hypothesis that researchers are actively exploring.
Okay.
While we don't have definitive answers yet, there's growing evidence that a nurturing environment can be protective, even with significant genetic vulnerability.
It's a reminder that even when facing challenging mental health conditions, hope is never lost.
Yeah,
While our genes may deal us a certain hand, we have the power to influence the outcome.
beautifully put. And that brings us back to the heart of behavioral genetics. It's not about determinism, it's about understanding.
Mm.
It's about recognizing the intricate interplay between our genes and our environment and empowering ourselves with that knowledge.
It's amazing to think about how much our understanding of mental health is evolving, especially with the insights we're gaining from behavioral genetics.
It truly is a paradigm shift. Take psychotherapy, for example.
Yeah,
We often think of therapy as focusing on our thoughts, behaviors, and experiences.
right.
But emerging research suggests our genes might also play a role in how we respond to different types of therapy.
So you're saying that some people might be genetically more likely to benefit from certain therapeutic approaches than others?
Exactly. There's this fascinating new field called genetical psychotherapy that's exploring how understanding our genetic predispositions could help us tailor therapy to be more effective.
So it's not about changing our genes, but about understanding how they might influence our therapeutic journey.
Precisely. Let's say someone has a genetic vulnerability to anxiety.
Okay.
A therapist might choose to focus on relaxation techniques and coping mechanisms rather than delving into deep-seated trauma, which could potentially heighten anxiety in some cases.
It makes sense to, work with our genetic blueprint rather than trying to rewrite it.
Right.
It's like personalized medicine, but for mental health.
That's a great way to put it. Think about the implications for the future.
Yeah.
We might be able to use genetic testing to guide treatment decisions and create therapies specifically tailored to an individual's genetic makeup.
It's incredible to think that this kind of personalized mental health care could become a reality. In this deep dive, we've covered so much. The basics of heritability, the complex interplay of genes and environment, specific mental health conditions,
Right.
and even the potential for genetically informed therapy.
It's been a truly insightful journey.
Yeah,
I hope you're leaving with a deeper understanding of how nature and nurture work together to shape who we are.
absolutely. And as we wrap up, I'd like to leave you with a final thought. The book we've been discussing points out that the interface between genes and experience is the frontier in the next generation of research. Now knowing what we do, how do you think understanding your own unique combination of genetic and environmental influences could shape your choices, your perspective on your own mental health, and even how we as a society approach mental health treatment in the future? It's something to ponder as we continue learning and exploring this incredible field.
That's a wonderful point to reflect on. It highlights how much more there is to discover in the world of behavioral genetics.
And on that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Keep those brains buzzing, everyone.
Until next time, keep exploring.